Mr. Speaker, when it is dry season, we pay the price because there is no water downstream. And Mr. Speaker, when the rainy season begins, like it has now, and the dams are full, and then the water is excess upstream, the only thing they will tell us downstream is that you people need to move to higher ground because we are going to release waters. Mr. Speaker, KenGen in particular has been our greatest enemy downstream. They release these waters with so much energy. Mr. Speaker, you could be sleeping in your house, and then in the morning you find you are not even on your bed. Mr. Speaker, people have lost animals in their thousands, in their hundreds, because water is released, and then when it comes, the communities downstream, they pay the price the second time, that they make huge financial losses. And Mr. Speaker, the question begs, when these programs and when these developments were being done, were there stakeholder participation by communities downstream? Mr. Speaker, the answer is negative. Mr. Speaker, when these projects were being conceived, apparently for the good of the country, were there any benefits that were transferable to the communities downstream? Mr. Speaker, the answer is negative. Mr. Speaker, when these projects were being done, were there environmental impact assessments that were carried? And how were these reports done? Because, Mr. Speaker, when you look at it, none of these environmental impact assessment reports on all these major projects have mentioned the river basin, have mentioned Garissa County or Tana River County. Mr. Speaker, yet we bear the brunt of all the losses that affect us downstream. Mr. Speaker, there are many experts who have studied river ecology, who are experts in lake ecology, and they tell us that the water upstream actually belongs to the people downstream. And Mr. Speaker, if projects are being done upstream, the biggest stakeholders are the people downstream. Mr. Speaker, in none of these projects that have been done on the River Tana have there been even a delegation of members of parliament who have been there before us, or elders from downstream who have been called to be told, you know, now your river is going to be dammed and this and that is going to happen. None has ever happened. There has been no stakeholder participation. There has been open suppression of the people, Mr. Speaker. And there's been no voice that has been given to those minorities whose lives depends on that river. Mr. Speaker, when we were growing up, there were oxbow lakes. When the river recedes, people used to do a lot of fishing. Mr. Speaker, there's no oxbow lakes anymore. When we were growing up, Mr. Speaker, the river used to move with force. People used to even use it for irrigation downstream. Mr. Speaker, now you will find the river has lost its power. You will find the river is cutting off entire villages because upstream, Mr. Speaker, the volume and the strength of the river has been cut down. And then you will find villages, Mr. Speaker, making homes of thousands of people, ancestral homes. They are cut off because the river comes, and then because it does not have power, it starts changing. It goes to the bushes, and people are left, whole communities, Mr. Speaker, that never used to know the lack of water. Whole communities that used to know that if I want to shower, I just go to the river. Now, Mr. Speaker, the river changes. And the government of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, has not been there to respond to our people. And the people have continued to be marginalized and impoverished, Mr. Speaker. And nothing has happened. So what this motion, Mr. Speaker, is asking this House is to recognize that we have a right as people who are downstream, as much as those people upstream have a right. And anything that is being done upstream will affect us downstream. And we are Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. We did not come here as refugees. We are Kenyans and we have a right and we need to be consulted. And Mr. Speaker, this Senate needs to pronounce itself very strongly. The Ministry of Water Irrigation, the Water Resources, the Water Resource Authority, it needs to start looking at the rights of the people who are downstream. So that, Mr. Speaker, everything that is being done upstream, we must be consulted. Mr. Speaker, in this motion, I have sought to bring to the attention of the House that the Anglo-Egyptian agreements that were signed by the British and the Egyptians were to the effect of protecting water sources. Mr. Speaker, 3 agreements were signed, 3 treaties were signed by the British and the colonies that were under the British at that time. And Egypt was seeking to protect, because it is a country that is downstream. The Nile River, Mr. Speaker, starts from Uganda and the areas, and then it moves through Sudan. Yeah? Not Masai Mara. Mr. Speaker, can you protect
Honorable
me?
Senator Ledama, kindly could we hear the senator in silence, please?
So, Mr. Speaker, it starts from upstream and it goes down to Sudan, then it divides the White Nile, the Blue Nile, and it goes all the way to Egypt. Mr. Speaker, Egypt in many occasions has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, Egypt in many occasions has been prepared to go to war because of its waters. And that is why to sort out these problems, there have been treaties, in fact, 3 treaties that have been signed to protect the volumes of water that are moving upstream and going downstream. Mr. Speaker, the first treaty that was signed, if I may recollect, was in 1903. And in that treaty, Mr. Speaker, Sudan at that time, which was a colony of Britain, was informed that you cannot do any economic or irrigation activities upstream because it will affect the life of Egypt downstream. And Egypt was prepared to go to war. And Mr. Speaker, that is why for a very long time, there has been no irrigation or any works that were being done because of that first treaty. Mr. Speaker, the second treaty and the third treaty, in fact, the 1959 treaty, it actually allocated the volumes of water. How much water would be, is supposed, the million of cubic waters that are supposed to be for Egypt, those ones that are supposed to be for South Sudan, or now the Sudan, and those ones that are supposed to be remaining with Uganda. And Mr. Speaker, the bulk of this water was allocated to Egypt. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in the 1959 treaty, if I may be able to quote it properly, Mr. Speaker, the allocation for Egypt was 55.5 billion cubic waters, or 66% of the volumes of the River Nile. Mr. Speaker, 22% or 18.5 billion cubic waters was allocated to the other colonies. And 12%, Mr. Speaker, was provided for evaporation. But when you look at that treaty and the details within which the provisions of that treaty stated, you see that Egypt, which was the downstream state, was given the bulk or the majority of the water, Mr. Speaker. So we are saying, Mr. Speaker, as we carry out activities of upstream, the River Tana, they should remember in international law, international treaty, the water belongs to the downstream people. The people upstream must use it with that in mind. We don't have, we don't have tanks. We don't have a military of our own. We don't have war machines. But Mr. Speaker, I'm telling you today, if the people of Tana River were to be given those machines, we would cause war against any person who touches that river. That river is life. That river gives us our identification. Mr. Speaker, I, Danson Mungatana, when I was born in Ngao, Mr. Speaker, my umbilical cord, Mr. Speaker, was cut and thrown in the river. That is the connection, Mr. Speaker, that river has with the people of the River Tana. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask this Senate, Mr. Speaker, to understand that the river is our life. The river is almost something that is almost connected to some sort of deity. Mr. Speaker, our people are suffering because this river is drying up. The activities upstream are destroying the lives of the people downstream. And Mr. Speaker, the government has not changed its mind about how to treat us downstream. Mr. Speaker, when they were diverting the water of River Tana down to the basin of Athi River to create water here for Nairobi, this huge project that was being done, I remember very well that the opposition in this nation, and I hope they continue being strong, it is the opposition that rose and said, you people are going to drain the basin of the river and the people are going to die. Mr. Speaker, that project has continued and it has not even involved our people.
Honorable Senator, your time is up. You have made your case. You have truly made your case. If you have a seconder, he can second.
I beg to move, and I never finished, Mr. Speaker, but it's okay. Boni Kalwale will second this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, that I am seconding this motion is not by any means by chance. Honorable Senator Mungatana created a partnership with me, with Ababu Namwamba, with the Gitobu Manyara, with Mother Karua, with the late Jacoyo Mediwo, and others for whom I cannot finish, around 10 of us. And we defined Kenya after Kenyans voted against tribalism in the year 2002, Mr. Speaker. Sorry if I've offended you, member.
What is your point of order on Honorable Senator Joyce Korir?
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. This House being House of Rules and Procedures, you had ruled that 5:30 we are going to have a debate on the, and already it's past 5:30. Kindly guide us.
Very well, Senator Joyce. I will allow the seconder to finish. I'll put the question so that when you resume on this motion, it will be time for honorable senators to contribute. I think it will be neater that way. So, honorable senator, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, without demeaning colleagues of previous parliaments, we achieved a lot through that partnership. And I want to thank the people of Tana River for having returned Mungatana to this parliament. Kenya needs him. Mungatana is the father of the Unclaimed Assets Authority. Through his brainchild, and like